The morning mist clung to the narrow streets of Newport, Oregon, weaving through the rows of quaint shops and cafes that lined the town's historic district. It was the kind of morning where the sea breeze carried the faint scent of salt and damp wood, where early risers huddled over their coffee watching the world wake up. But today, like every other day, the usual hum of morning routine was interrupted by an extraordinary sight. Emerging from the mist, 6 massive German shepherds moved in perfect synchrony, their sleek coats shimmering under the soft light of dawn. Their dark eyes were sharp, alert, scanning their surroundings with almost military precision. They walked with such discipline that they seemed almost mechanical, until the townspeople caught sight of their leader. At the center of this powerful formation was a child, barely 6 years old. Lily Carter walked among them, her tiny frame nearly swallowed by the sheer presence of the dogs. Dressed in a faded blue hoodie and red sneakers, she moved with quiet confidence, her hands relaxed at her sides. There were no leashes, no commands, just subtle shifts in her posture, a barely perceptible tilt of her head, and the pack obeyed. The streets grew still as heads turned. Locals stepped out of doorways, baristas paused mid-pour, and a pair of construction workers on a break exchanged startled glances. A child commanding 6 powerful German shepherds, it defied explanation. "Would you look at that?" Tom Mitchell muttered, the owner of the local hardware store. He leaned against his shop's doorway, arms crossed. "Those dogs mind their kid better than my own damn teenagers listen to me." Officer Ryan Brooks, one of Newport's few police officers, watched from his patrol car. He had noticed the girl before, but every time he saw her, it was still hard to believe. No 6-year-old should have that kind of control over 6 fully grown, highly trained dogs. He made a mental note to ask around about the Carter family, not out of suspicion necessarily, just curiosity. A few feet away, Helen Whitmore tightened her shawl around her shoulders. The retired school principal had lived in Newport for over 40 years and had always prided herself on knowing the ins and outs of every family in town. Yet something about Lily Carter and her dogs unsettled her. "No child should have that kind of power over animals," she murmured to her friend Linda Cooper. "It's unnatural." Linda, who had always had a mild fear of large dogs, nodded vigorously. "It's dangerous, Helen. What if those things snap? She's just a kid." Helen's sharp eyes followed Lily and her pack as they moved further down the street. "I don't care what anyone says, something is wrong in that house." Lily was used to the stares. She felt them even if she didn't react. People always watched her and the dogs, whispering behind coffee cups and under their breath. Some were in awe, some skeptical, others wary, but none of it mattered. Not to her. Not to the dogs. She glanced sideways at Max, the leader of the pack, his dark coat rippling with every measured step. The oldest and largest of the 6, he was her protector, always had been. With a barely visible twitch of her fingers, she signaled a turn, and the entire pack adjusted instantly, flowing like water around a group of tourists taking photos. Most of the town had simply accepted her routine as a part of Newport's strange charm. She walked the dogs every morning, rain or shine, and then disappeared back into the quiet outskirts where she lived with her grandparents. No one ever saw her play with other children. No one heard her speak, except perhaps to the dogs. By the time Lily reached the town square, a small crowd had gathered, as it often did. Some people took photos, others whispered, but today something different happened. A boy, no older than 10, was riding his bike down the sidewalk, his front wheel wobbling slightly as he tried to swerve around a pothole. In an instant, his bike tipped too far, sending him sprawling onto the pavement with a loud thud. The dogs reacted instantly. Ghost, the leanest of the pack, lunged forward, muscles tense, while Stella let out a sharp warning bark. The others formed a protective half-circle around Lily, their eyes locked on the fallen boy. People gasped. Someone shouted, "Get those dogs back!" The boy, startled but unharmed, pushed himself up with wide eyes. He hadn't been attacked, but the sight of 6 massive dogs moving in sync had sent his adrenaline spiking. Lily, unbothered by the commotion, simply lifted her hand. The pack immediately relaxed, stepping back as if nothing had happened. Max took one last assessing look at the boy, then turned his head, dismissing the incident entirely. Officer Ryan Brooks, who had been observing from a distance, decided it was time to intervene. He stepped forward, raising a hand to the nervous onlookers. "Everyone calm down," he said, his deep voice cutting through the tension. "Nobody's hurt." Helen, however, saw an opportunity. She marched forward, pointing a stern finger at Lily. "This is exactly what I've been warning people about. It's only a matter of time before someone really gets hurt." Lily stared at her, expression unreadable. Tom Mitchell scoffed from his spot near the hardware store. "Helen, for God's sake, the kid just fell off his bike. Those dogs didn't lay a paw on him." Helen wasn't deterred. "This isn't normal. A child shouldn't have control over animals like that. Something is going on in that house." Officer Brooks sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He had never seen those dogs show aggression toward anyone unless it was in defense of Lily. Still, the murmurs around the square suggested Helen's words were getting through to some people, and with the way gossip spread in a small town like Newport, he knew this wasn't the last he'd hear of it. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Helen remained where she stood, watching Lily with an expression that was hard to read: suspicion, fear, maybe something else. Lily held her gaze for a moment longer before turning on her heel, signaling to her pack without a word. The 6 German shepherds fell into step beside her, and together they disappeared down the street. Helen tightened her grip on her shawl. She didn't know what secrets the Carter family was hiding, but she intended to find out. The rain had been relentless that October night, drumming against the windshield of the Carter family's SUV as they drove home from Lily's grandparents' house. Daniel Carter, a former police K-9 trainer, kept his hand steady on the wheel, while Emily, his wife and longtime partner in their dog training business, hummed softly to calm their drowsy daughter in the back seat. Max, their most experienced German shepherd, lay curled up beside Lily, his dark eyes scanning the road ahead with a quiet alertness. They never saw the other car coming. A blinding flash of headlights, the deafening screech of tires, the sickening crunch of metal upon impact, and then silence, except for the patter of rain on shattered glass. Max was the first to move. Disoriented but unhurt, the massive dog shook off the shock and sniffed the air, sensing danger. The front seats were crumpled. Daniel and Emily were motionless, but the soft whimpering from the back seat drew his immediate focus. Lily. The door was jammed, the frame bent inward from the force of the crash. Smoke began to rise from the engine, hissing angrily as the first flickers of orange licked the edges of the broken dashboard. Max lunged forward, his powerful jaws clamping onto the seatbelt that pinned Lily in place. With one forceful tug, the belt snapped. He grabbed the collar of her jacket, dragging her small body through the broken window just as the flames roared to life. By the time emergency responders arrived, the car was an inferno. Daniel and Emily Carter never made it out. Lily, barely 6 years old, stood in the cold rain, clutching Max's fur with trembling fingers, her wide eyes reflecting the fire that consumed her family. She never spoke a word from that night on. Lily's selective mutism baffled doctors and therapists. She had suffered no physical injuries, but the trauma had locked her voice away. Every attempt at speech ended in silent gasps, as if the words were trapped inside her, too painful to release. Her grandparents, James and Margaret Carter, took her in, their hearts aching for the quiet little girl who once giggled freely. They tried everything: therapy sessions, speech specialists, even comforting bedtime stories whispered into the dim glow of a nightlight, but nothing worked. The only time Lily seemed at peace was when she was with the dogs. Max had never left her side since the accident. Wherever Lily went, he followed, his unwavering presence a silent promise. When she curled up on the floor, he curled beside her. When she refused to eat, he nuzzled her hands until she took a bite. He was her protector, her last link to the parents she had lost. Her grandparents quickly realized that it wasn't just Max. Lily had an unexplainable connection to all the dogs Daniel and Emily had trained. 6 German Shepherds still remained at the Carter family home: Max, Rosie, Bruno, Stella, Ghost, and Titan. Though James and Margaret loved animals, they were in their 70s, their health failing, and they simply couldn't keep up with the needs of so many large, highly trained dogs. "We should rehome them," James had whispered one night, rubbing his chest absent-mindedly, his heart condition making his voice weaker than usual. Margaret had hesitated, glancing toward the living room where Lily sat on the floor, surrounded by the dogs, her small fingers tracing symbols in the dust on the old wooden floor. They had never seen anything like it, how the dogs responded to her every gesture as if they understood something beyond simple training. "Look at her," Margaret said softly. "They're all she has left." And so the dog stayed. One evening, while rummaging through the attic, Lily discovered an old, dust-covered box labeled Carter K9 Academy. Inside, she found her father's handwritten training journals, pages filled with detailed notes, diagrams, and command sequences. Unlike traditional training manuals, these journals contained something unique, an intricate system of nonverbal communication, a language built entirely on gestures, eye contact, and subtle movements. Fascinated, Lily devoured every word under the glow of a flashlight, tracing the symbols over and over with her fingers. Her father had written extensive notes on how each dog responded to different techniques, recording their quirks and behaviors like a scientist documenting a discovery. She began to experiment in secret. Late at night, when her grandparents were asleep, she would slip outside with Max, practicing the commands she had learned. A flick of her wrist, a tilt of her head, a soft tap of her fingers against her leg, Max understood each one as if they had spoken in words. The other dogs soon followed. Within weeks, Lily had recreated her parents' techniques, adapting them into something even more refined. Without ever speaking a word, she could command all 6 German Shepherds with perfect precision. They moved as a unit, responding to her silent language as if they were an extension of her own body. By the time she turned 6, the once-broken girl had transformed into something remarkable, a child who could control an entire pack of elite-trained dogs without a single spoken command. But the town of Newport had questions. The sight of a tiny girl leading 6 massive German Shepherds through the streets, without leashes, without struggle, was nothing short of extraordinary. It was unnatural, people whispered. They watched. Some were fascinated, others uneasy, especially Helen Whitmore. The retired teacher had always prided herself on her keen instincts about children, and something about Lily Carter disturbed her deeply. No child, no matter how gifted, should be able to control animals like that. "She's just a little girl," Helen muttered to herself, watching from her window as Lily and her dogs passed by. "And little girls shouldn't have that kind of power." She told herself she was acting out of concern, out of duty to protect the child from whatever dark secret lurked behind those silent eyes. But deep down, Helen knew the truth she wasn't ready to admit. She wasn't afraid for Lily. She was afraid of her. And she wasn't the only one. The sun had barely risen over Newport when the first whispers started spreading through town. At the corner cafe, where fishermen gathered before heading out to sea, someone pulled up a video on their phone. By lunchtime, it was all anyone could talk about. "Have you seen it?" Jason Murphy, owner of Murphy's Grill, asked excitedly as he wiped down the counter. "The video of the Carter kid. It's insane." Tom Mitchell, the hardware store owner, chimed in. "I've never seen anything like it. She moves her hand and boom, those dogs obey like trained soldiers." The video, shot by a passing tourist, showed Lily walking through town with Max, Rosie, Bruno, Stella, Ghost, and Titan in perfect formation. At a crosswalk, she barely lifted a finger, and the dog stopped instantly, waiting for a cue to proceed. Another subtle motion had them splitting into 2 groups before merging back together effortlessly. It was as if she had an invisible leash connecting her to them. As the video spread online, Newport streets filled with curiosity seekers. Some wanted to witness the spectacle firsthand, hoping to catch a glimpse of the dog whisperer kid. Others weren't so enamored. "She's just a little girl," Linda Cooper muttered to a neighbor as they watched Lily pass by. "No child should be left alone with 6 enormous dogs. It's reckless. It's dangerous." Helen Whitmore, standing nearby, folded her arms. "That's exactly what I've been saying. No 6-year-old should be in charge of animals that could tear someone apart in seconds." Word traveled fast, and soon a petition began circulating, demanding that Lily be banned from walking the dogs unsupervised. Helen, leveraging her years as a respected educator, spearheaded the effort. Within days, she had dozens of signatures. Meanwhile, Officer Ryan Brooks kept a close eye on the situation. Unlike Helen, he didn't jump to conclusions. Instead, he watched Lily closely, making mental notes of her behavior. "She's not just some kid playing pretend," he told Tom one evening. "She's got complete control over those dogs. I've worked with K9 units before, and I can tell you, that's not something you fake." Tom nodded. "But do you think it's safe?" Officer Brooks hesitated. "That's the question, isn't it?" The growing attention made life more difficult for Lily and her grandparents. Strangers showed up outside their house, peering through the fence. Reporters from Portland called, asking for interviews. Margaret Carter, already overwhelmed by caring for Lily and her husband, started screening calls. "Lily, sweetheart," she said one afternoon, kneeling beside the girl as she brushed Titan's fur. "People are asking questions. They don't understand." Lily looked up, her green eyes filled with quiet resolve. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Margaret sighed, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "I know you love them," she whispered. "But I don't know how much longer we can keep this up." Then the incident happened. It was a breezy afternoon when a group of kids raced their bikes down the sloping street near the park. One boy, no older than 10, hit a bump and went flying over his handlebars. He landed hard, scraping his knees and palms. He screamed in pain. Lily had been walking nearby. The second the boy fell, Max and Bruno moved instinctively, sprinting toward him. Stella and Rosie followed, forming a protective arc around the injured child. Gasps erupted from bystanders. To some, it looked like an attack. "Those dogs are going after him," someone shouted. "No, they're helping," another voice countered. The boy, wide-eyed, flinched as Max nudged him gently, sniffing at his wounds. Rosie lay down beside him, her warm body providing comfort. But the damage was done. A woman, likely the boy's mother, rushed in, yanking him away. "Get those dogs away from my son," she shrieked. Lily hurried forward, raising a hand. The dogs instantly backed away, returning to her side. But the onlookers were already buzzing with fear and speculation. That evening, the town Facebook page exploded with debates. "Those dogs are out of control," Linda Cooper posted. "Are you kidding?" "They were helping the kid," Jason Murphy argued. Even Officer Brooks weighed in. "I saw the footage from a nearby store's security camera. The dogs didn't attack, they responded to a child in distress the way a trained search and rescue dog would." But the fear had already taken root. The next day, Helen Whitmore took her concerns to City Hall, filing an official request for an investigation into Lily's guardianship and her ability to control the dogs. "This is about child safety," she declared. "If her grandparents can't supervise her properly, the authorities need to step in." As the petition gained traction, an outsider took notice. Jonathan Pierce, a journalist from Portland, had been covering human interest stories for over a decade. When he saw the video of Lily and her dogs, he knew there was more to the story than what people were saying. He packed his bag, grabbed his camera, and drove straight to Newport. The first place he stopped was Murphy's Grill. He had a feeling the restaurant owner would have the inside scoop. "You're here about the Carter kid, aren't you?" Jason asked, sliding a coffee across the counter. Jonathan nodded. "What's your take?" Jason leaned in. "That little girl, she's special. Those dogs aren't just following her. They love her. I don't know how, but she understands them in a way I've never seen before." Jonathan scribbled in his notebook. "And the controversy?" Jason sighed. "Some folks don't like what they don't understand." The reporter spent the next 2 days observing Lily, keeping a respectful distance. What he saw fascinated him, the way she moved with the dogs, the way they responded to her slightest cues. It wasn't normal, but it also wasn't dangerous. Then, on his third day in town, he got a tip from an unexpected source. Officer Brooks met him outside the station. "I shouldn't be telling you this," he admitted, "but I think Helen Whitmore is hiding something. She's pushing too hard, like she's got a personal reason for wanting Lily separated from those dogs." Jonathan frowned. "Like what?" The officer shook his head. "That's what I need you to find out." The next morning, the town received shocking news. Helen Whitmore had officially filed a petition for custody intervention. If she succeeded, Lily would be removed from her grandparents' care, and the dogs would be taken away. Jonathan knew then, this wasn't just a local dispute. This was about something much bigger, and he intended to uncover the truth. The tension in Newport had reached a boiling point. The peaceful town, once known for its close-knit community and picturesque coastal charm, was now divided over a 6-year-old girl and her extraordinary bond with 6 German shepherds. The controversy had escalated so much that Helen Whitmore and Linda Cooper had formally submitted a petition to the city council, demanding an investigation into the Carter household. The document called for the removal of the dogs from Lily's care, citing public safety concerns and alleging that James and Margaret Carter were unfit guardians. It was a move that outraged half the town while emboldening the other half. The hearing was scheduled at the Newport Community Hall, a modest but historic building that now found itself at the center of the town's most heated debate in years. The event was open to the public, and by the time it was set to begin, the hall was packed. Some residents stood against the back walls, whispering among themselves, while others sat still in their chairs, waiting for the proceedings to start. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation, and even Officer Ryan Brooks, standing near the entrance, could feel the unease in the air. Margaret Carter sat beside Lily, holding her granddaughter's hand tightly. James, still frail from his heart condition, sat with his cane resting against his knee, his jaw clenched in quiet determination. On the other side of the aisle, Helen sat primly in her chair, her petition documents stacked neatly in front of her. Linda Cooper, always eager to fuel the fire, sat beside her, a smug expression on her face. The council members took their seats at the front of the hall, and the meeting was called to order. The mayor, Richard Olson, cleared his throat and addressed the crowd. "We're here today to discuss concerns raised by members of our community regarding the safety and well-being of Lily Carter and her dogs. This is a sensitive issue, and I expect everyone to remain respectful as we move forward." Helen was the first to speak. She stood with the same authoritative posture she had once used as an elementary school principal. "I bring this petition forward not out of malice, but out of deep concern for the welfare of this child and for our community's safety," she began. "A 6-year-old should not be responsible for 6 large, powerful dogs. It is dangerous, and it is neglectful. This is not a fairy tale, it's real life. What happens when something goes wrong?" Linda Cooper stood next. "I understand that many of you are enchanted by the idea of this little girl commanding a pack of dogs, but let's be realistic. What if one of those dogs turns aggressive? What if someone gets hurt? We can't afford to wait for a tragedy." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Then Jason Murphy, the restaurant owner, stood up. "I've watched that girl walk those dogs every morning, and you know what? They are better trained than most people's pets in this town. I've never seen an ounce of aggression from them. If anything, they protect her. She's safe with them." The debate raged on, with townspeople arguing passionately for both sides. Officer Brooks finally spoke, standing near the front. "I've observed Lily and her dogs for weeks," he said. "Not once have they shown uncontrolled aggression. I have more concerns about people speeding through downtown than I do about that little girl and her dogs." Dr. Caleb Morgan, the town veterinarian, stepped forward next. "I've examined every single one of those dogs. They are healthy, well-trained, and incredibly disciplined. And I'll add something else. Max, the eldest, has been alerting Mr. Carter before his heart issues escalate. That dog might have saved his life multiple times." A collective gasp swept the room. Helen looked momentarily thrown off, but she quickly recovered. "That does not mean that Lily should be responsible for them," she insisted. Then another voice spoke up, Jason Murphy again. He pulled out his phone and connected it to the projector at the front of the hall. "I have something else to show you," he said. The screen flickered to life, showing grainy security footage from the public garden a few months earlier. The room fell silent as the video played. The footage showed Lily approaching the edge of a decorative pond. She leaned forward, likely trying to retrieve something, when she lost her balance and fell in. The water wasn't deep, but it was enough to overwhelm a child of her size. She thrashed, struggling to find footing, when suddenly Max leaped into the water. The dog maneuvered behind her, using his powerful body to push her toward the edge. Within moments, Lily was back on dry land, coughing but safe. Max climbed out beside her, nudging her protectively. Gasps filled the room. The weight of what they had just seen settled over the crowd like a heavy fog. "That dog saved her life," Jason said simply. "You really want to take him away from her?" The silence was thick. Helen's face had lost some of its confident arrogance. Even Linda Cooper looked shaken. Then, in the quiet, something happened that no one expected. Lily stood up. For the first time in 2 years, she faced a crowd without shrinking. Margaret squeezed her hand but let go, understanding that this was Lily's moment. The little girl stepped forward, Max sitting beside her. She took a deep breath, then, in a voice so soft it barely reached the back of the hall, she spoke. "Please don't take them away," she whispered. Then, stronger, "They keep the nightmares from coming back." The entire hall seemed to freeze. Helen's eyes widened as if she had seen a ghost. Margaret covered her mouth in a quiet sob. James wiped his eyes. Even Officer Brooks had to clear his throat before speaking. "Miss Whitmore," he said gently, turning to Helen. "Do you still want to pursue this case?" Helen hesitated. Her lips parted, then closed. For a long moment, she simply stared at Lily, at the girl she had tried so hard to separate from her dogs. Then, with a shuddering breath, she lowered her head. "No," she said quietly. "I withdraw my petition." A ripple of relief surged through the crowd. Margaret pulled Lily into her arms. Jason clapped his hands, and others followed, filling the hall with applause. Helen, however, did not join in. She simply gathered her things and walked out, her head bowed. As the meeting adjourned, Lily knelt beside Max, wrapping her arms around him. The fight was over. She had spoken, and the town had listened. But Helen's reaction had not gone unnoticed, and what no one knew yet was that the truth, the whole truth, was about to come out. The morning after the hearing, Newport was still buzzing with the shocking turn of events. Lily's quiet but powerful testimony had left an impact on the entire town. At the Carter household, relief mixed with exhaustion. James and Margaret, still overwhelmed by the intensity of the courtroom battle, sat together in the living room, watching Lily curl up with Max and the other dogs, their presence providing her with the comfort no human words could. But the battle wasn't over. There was still an unresolved piece of the puzzle, one that had been buried under years of guilt and secrecy. A knock at the door interrupted the quiet. Margaret opened it, her face tightening when she saw Helen Whitmore standing there, her hands clutching a neatly folded envelope. Helen looked different, not the stern, judgmental woman who had stood against them in court, but someone worn down by an invisible weight. "I need to speak with Lily," Helen said, her voice unusually soft. Margaret hesitated, glancing back at the living room where Lily sat. James, noticing the tension, stood up and walked to the door. "Haven't you done enough?" His voice was firm but laced with fatigue. Helen nodded slowly. "I have. But there's something she deserves to know." Margaret sighed, stepping aside. "Lily, sweetheart," she called gently. "Come here for a moment." Lily peeked from behind Max, cautious as she walked toward the doorway. The dogs followed closely, their bodies forming a silent barrier between her and the woman who had tried to take them away. Helen inhaled deeply, steadying herself. "Lily, there's something I've kept from you, something I should have told you a long time ago." She clutched the envelope in her hands but made no move to give it away just yet. Her gaze flickered to Max, who watched her with quiet intensity, as if he already knew what was coming. "I was there," Helen whispered. "The night your parents died." The room went still. James stiffened, his fingers tightening around the armrest of the chair. Margaret paled, her hand pressing against her chest. But it was Lily who barely moved, her large eyes locked onto Helen's face. "I was the driver," Helen continued, her voice cracking. "It was raining so hard, and I ran the red light. I hit your parents' car." Her breath shuddered. "I didn't mean to, I swear to you, Lily. I never meant to." A strangled gasp escaped Margaret's lips, and James shot up from his chair, his face red with rage. "You..." Helen held up a shaking hand. "Please, let me finish." She turned back to Lily, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was drinking that night. Not much, just 2 glasses of wine over dinner, but it was enough. The police didn't charge me because of the storm. They said the conditions were bad, visibility was low, that it could have happened to anyone. But I knew it was my fault." Tears welled in her eyes. "And when I saw you with these dogs, when I saw Max, I panicked because I was afraid that they remembered me, afraid that you would too." A long silence stretched between them. Lily didn't speak, but Max did. The dog, who had been rigid and watchful, suddenly relaxed. His ears lowered, and instead of a growl, he let out a quiet whimper before stepping toward Helen. Helen gasped as Max gently nudged her hand. Lily finally moved. She reached out and placed her small fingers on Max's back, drawing strength from his warmth. Then, in a voice so soft yet steady, she spoke. "You hurt my mom and dad." Helen nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I did. And I will never be able to undo that." Lily lowered her gaze, her fingers curling into Max's fur. The weight of the revelation pressed down on her tiny frame, but she did not look away. And then, ever so slowly, she nodded, not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Helen exhaled a shuddering breath, as if something heavy had been lifted off her chest. She placed the envelope on the table beside Margaret. "I've written a full confession and submitted it to the police. I'm also setting up a trust fund for Lily's education and for the care of these dogs." She met Lily's eyes one last time. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope one day you can." With that, Helen turned and walked out the door. That night, Lily sat outside on the porch, staring at the sky. James and Margaret watched from the window, unsure of whether to join her. But before they could move, Lily whispered something. Max, lying beside her, let out a soft huff, then nudged her hand, as if saying, "I understand." Lily let out a small breath, then turned back toward the house, stepping inside without another word. In the weeks that followed, Newport began to heal in its own way. The petition to remove Lily's dogs was withdrawn, and the town council, seeing the outpouring of support for Lily, declared Max and the other dogs as official therapy animals. Helen Whitmore quietly stepped away from her leadership roles, moving to a smaller home on the edge of town. She never tried to approach Lily again, but every month, a donation was anonymously made to the local animal shelter in the name of the Carter family. Lily, with the encouragement of Dr. Morgan, started working with other children who had suffered trauma, helping them learn to connect with the therapy dogs. Over time, her voice grew stronger. The nightmares still came, but less frequently, and every morning, without fail, she still walked her 6 German shepherds through the streets of Newport. One day, as she passed by the hardware store, Tom Mitchell called out, "You keep those dogs in line better than most folks keep their kids in line, Lily." Lily paused. Then, for the first time in public, she smiled. "They understand my heart," she said simply. "They don't need words to know when you're sorry." The town of Newport had changed, and so had Lily Carter. But one thing remained the same: she and her dogs were inseparable. They always would be. And this time, the town wouldn't dare to stand in their way. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to hit that like button. Your support means the world to us and helps more people discover stories of healing, forgiveness, and the incredible bonds we form with our animal companions. Have you ever experienced a connection with an animal that went beyond words? Or perhaps you've witnessed the healing power of pets in your own life. Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. For more heartwarming stories that celebrate the resilience of the human spirit, subscribe to our channel. Every week, we bring you true tales of courage, compassion, and the extraordinary connections that make life meaningful. And if you know someone who could use a reminder of the power of understanding and forgiveness, please share this video with them. Sometimes, the stories we share become the bridges that connect us to each other, reminding us that even in our darkest moments, we're never truly alone. Until next time, remember that healing comes in many forms, and sometimes, the most profound connections require no words at all.